Hello gamers, what's up? It's Gold Demon here, back with another video. Today I'm going to be yapping about why tier lists are bad. Yeah, anyways, my chat's going off on some other unrelated topic. But yeah, tier lists, as you've seen me cover and many other channels cover, is various tier lists, primarily the Pride Win tier list. Everybody knows the Pride Win tier list, many love, many hate. Well, today I want to talk about a little bit on why it sucks. And I'm not saying the list as a whole sucks, but there are certain aspects of tier lists that people typically ignore. And Pride One, for one, does something that is very, very cringe for tier lists, right? And that is usage rates. That's one of the things I want to talk about today on why, well, usage rates ultimately are a bad thing to consider for tier lists, period. Additionally, I want to talk about some bad tier list sites. Tier lists themselves not being perfect, incorrect info, incorrect, wrong info, misunderstood info, like anything related to that. Agenda pushing that happens as a result of these tier lists, the lack of nuance within tier lists, which is kind of correlated to tier lists not being perfect. And then, of course, this one I think is very, very important to talk about. You, yes, you, the viewer, may not know as much as you think you know about the game, all right? Just saying. And then, of course, lastly, it's going to get worse because of AI. Because, oh boy, do I have an interesting site for you. So, starting off with Pride One. Pride One is the primary one, and the reason why I had an original video about this that I never actually uploaded is Pride One losing it, right? The general idea of the video was talking about all the issues with that current version of the Pride One tier list alongside other issues, and this is sort of going to be a, well, updated version of that video. And starting off with the fact that they use usage rates. Now, I've talked about this before in multiple times in my videos, and chat probably, is going to be annoyed at me for mentioning it for like the 20th time after we've popped up Pride One tier list. But the fact that they use usage rates is a problem. It was in here somewhere, is a problem for multiple reasons. But the main one is that it undermines the unit's actual rating because it introduces bias to the tier list, right? You can, whenever you make a tier list, make it based on, various different factors. But when we are basing a tier list off of performance, right, that is something that you can statistically write down on paper and have a determined value for, right? Such as a zero cycle clear. Now, we do know that Pride One doesn't count zero cycle ability, right? We aren't looking at zero cycle potential. They consider flexibility, investment, and utility. However, these are things that you can in some way assign a static value to, an actual attribute, something that isn't dictated by external means, so it's unbiased, right? It has no human input, no human emotion applied to it, right? As to where if you add in usage rates, which they have mentioned many times before, and they also give that as being the reason for multiple characters, that introduces bias, which therefore completely, or not completely, but in some ways invalidates the actual performance of the unit because it's something that is not statistically applicable with how people will prefer a certain character, whether it's based on the design, animations, sound, whatever it may be, story, right? This is something that should not be considered for a tier list, and it completely ruins the structure of any tier list that is ranking characters based on performance, right? Just that simple. You don't want this. You don't want bias in your scientific data. This is what gets papers thrown out, right? That's like the main problem with a list like Pride One. Pride One is, fortunately or unfortunately, the best source we have for Star Rail information. Which it's good that we do have a site like this, but of course their tier list has to be taken with a grain of salt for reasons like the usage rate thing, right? This has been brought up in multiple videos by me. I haven't seen anybody else bring up usage rates before in their videos, but it is something important to talk about as well. Usage rates are dictated by, as I said, human bias, human input, something that isn't something you can write down as like, pen and paper math, like things that are, defined values, right? That is the biggest issue with the Pride One tier list. Obviously, there's issues with the placements that many of us have. Often ones I talk about are Saber and Acheron, right? Being where they are. Obviously, Argenti and Rappa. I think Rappa is probably the biggest insult on this entire list, or maybe even Jade, but that's besides the point. Pride One isn't the only one who does this, though. Many other sites do this, and I have to refresh all these sites, but I think they're the biggest contributor and probably the most important one, as this is the one that everybody talks about, that we all love to farm views off of. And that being said, that's actually one of the reasons why I stopped doing it for a little bit, but then came back and started doing this again, because I want to try to make this a interesting talking point to talk about the state of the game and actually have a good conversation of the game's meta and so on and so on, and like actually provide good context input and have an honest discussion about how things work and function. And that's what I try to do in my streams as well, right? Explain everything in detail, how it works, right? And so that's why I've started doing those videos again. They farm views and it can be a good talking point. And so I can compromise a little bit there with the fact that, hey, Pride 1 stuff isn't perfect, but it's better than literally everything else, which is one of the next things we get to, bad sites. Hello, what's up? There are so many bad sites for tier lists, and it's pretty much everything that isn't Pride 1. If you go onto any forums like Reddit, I was gonna say 4chan. I don't know if they do Star Rail tier lists. Twitter, hell, even YouTube. A lot of people in YouTube, they don't know what they're talking about, which is, you know, my other point. Hoyo Lab is the biggest offender of this stuff. Worst post of all time. I might have to put up a video about that. I'll look at that later. But there are a different range of bad sites. You have anything from AI slop to whatever the hell Genshin / Honkai Lab is. This one, I've already made multiple videos on. And it is so funny because they just get stuff completely wrong. To where, I swear to God, they don't play the game. It seems like these sites are made by AI slop. But to some extent, I know for a fact that, or at least to my knowledge, Game 8 is made by real people. To my knowledge, somehow Genshin Lab is made by real people. Somehow these other, to be fair, this one's out of date. Somehow these other sites are made by real people. But that's where I found this interesting one the other day when I was looking for this, getting ready for this topic. This tier list right here. Oopsies, that is the wrong thing. What the hell popped up there? Wait, did it just close out? Oh my God, it closed out. Okay, we have to pull that back up. Sorry, I think this site's like a crypto mine or something. Well, anyways, you can tell from the image, it is AI generated. Not only is the image AI generated, but as far as I can tell, the entire thing is AI generated. I know I'm skipping a bit ahead here, but this is literally insane. There isn't a single person who could legitimately justify putting the top tier characters of being Firefly, Acheron, and Sparkle, and then the entire rest of the game below them. And you can also look at the formatting for yourself, right? Alongside the image, alongside all this other stuff. This, I think, is fully AI generated. And this one is just insane. And this will get to my other point, but I think this stuff is going to get worse as time goes on in terms of tier list and information about the game, which sucks because we would have a better community and healthier game state if people had correct information to work off of. And if we had, you know, genuine conversations about this stuff instead of all this narrative pushing that happens within the community because of tier list to some extent, right? Anyways, we got a bit of a tangent, but I tried to pull this up earlier. I don't know what happened. The site erred, but you can see to this day, and this is my point I was making, they still mention usage rates. So in case anybody was like, oh, I don't know, but no, this is one of the big things they talk about on their site. They've used it less as like talking about it, but it's a thing fundamentally baked into their site and how they rate characters. Like Tribby, for example, they say it right here. They're colossal usage rates, gatekeep the other characters, right? You have Fine on here, who is raised in part due to his high usage rates, which again, with him, he is really good against specific matchups, like a lot of characters are nowadays, but you know, that's one of the main things, right? They've done really positive matchups for him, even still. And then of course, they mention these other characters who have various usage rates as well, like Bronya being go up because of Fine on entirely. And then same thing with Sparkle because of the release of Archer, right? So this is one of the things that, again, I don't agree with the way that they rate their characters, partly because of that. That's the main thing. As for the bad sites, this one is a very simple point. Some of these sites just suck because of lack of detail and information, just completely wrong ratings. And those are really the two things that matter at the most part, right? Bad ratings and lack of information. Primary one being Genshin Lab. So first off, you have to be out of your mind to think those top characters are valid. We're really gonna say that Evernight, the Dot Girl, Saber, Finon, Castorice are on the same tier as Firefly, Fei Xiao, that one's wild, Acheron, the Herta and Agalea? No, we're not. Additionally, look at the tier right below them. It's Jingliu, Zila, and Dr. Ratio. If you play the game, you know this is wrong. It's that simple. But yeah, a bunch of these sites that aren't Pride-Win, they just suck for a variety of reasons. They're complete slop websites, and they do this for multiple games, right? Same thing with Game8. Game8 also does the same thing. These ratings are just straight up, I would say, it's just straight up wrong. Like, Fei Xiao does not belong anywhere near there, and a lot of these other characters are just not that tier, like how Ruan Mei is no longer on the tier as someone like Tribi, right? Doesn't make any sense. Tribi is far superior for basically every team she wants to be played in. Same thing with this other set that I have here, Joyfee or whatever. That one's a bit outdated, to be fair. Same thing with this one. A lot of these sites like to overrate characters. Like, I don't know why the hell they've got Fujuan up there in SS tier. Like, who invited Bud to the party? Especially putting Agalea and these other characters below Fei Xiao. Insane to me. These are just completely wrong in every regard. Same thing with this other site, LD Shop. Everybody knows this one. I hate this site because it is a vendor. I am vehemently against gacha vendors for multiple reasons. Ask yourself, how do they get their money? All right. Anyways, that's besides the point. This is also another bad site where they just throw up slop articles. And then here's another one, which this one is just bad, and it puts characters like Dan Hung and Bibiter Lune at the top tier, right? These sites suck. They have bad information. They also do not fully explain anything. While I can criticize Pride-Win, they at least have better explanations than all these other sites, so that immediately gives them a leg up. They also detail their change logs, and every character has their own dedicated reviews, builds, and math section, okay? Well, not always in the math section, to be fair, but they also do take a bunch of user data, and you can see the averages from players that submit their data. Of course, this is going to be a biased pool of players. Like I said before, bias introduces problems to a thing that's based on performance, but still, everything they have here is infinitely more information for you as the, the viewer, right, the audience, to use as information to build your understanding of the game versus all these sites, which are in some cases just complete AI slop, or in Genshin Lab's case, just does stuff completely wrong. I want to see if this one example is still here. Silverwolf, of course. So Silverwolf got buffed, and did they change how she is ranked? Okay, they actually did. To be fair, they did it right. But I'll show you an example on one of the other tier lists that I know for a fact they still have wrong, unless they updated it recently. But it was a really funny example where they've got Cookie Shinobu and her skill icon. Yep, it's still there. Yep. So Cookie Shinobu, her skill icons and everything are completely wrong. Yep, I'm going to trust this site when they've got the most basic stuff wrong. This is Raiden's ability. Awesome. Same thing with this one. Awesome. Got it completely wrong. And they even do stuff like putting her in a mono electric team, even though this is a character that's meant for elemental reactions. This doesn't work in Genshin's case. They do the same thing for Star Rail Lab, right? Or Honkai Lab, whatever it's called. This site just gets stuff straight up wrong. They do the same thing. To be fair, if you want to talk about the modern context of Genshin Impact, sure, they do the same thing. But either way, you get my point. They just have completely wrong or bad information on this site, and it is just a bad site in general. Also, a lot of these sites are inundated with million ads that will just ruin your experience and probably corrupt your computer in some way, which is why I have an ad block on. That's besides the point. Anyways, that one is pretty short and simple. These sites just suck for a variety of reasons. The next one is tier lists themselves are not perfect. A lot of the times people just upload an image of a tier list and say, have at it. That is not enough for you to fully understand the concept of what is going on for that particular list. And it's also not enough for you to understand how it applies to the game, because everybody is going to have a different perspective on a lot of these tier lists, especially when you do have stuff like introducing bias, right? The nature of tier lists themselves, like, it's just a way to quickly get across information, but it's not perfect. It's just pictures, right? It lacks that detail that I was mentioning earlier that Pride 1 has, right? And so you should obviously try to build your understanding of the game via various means by taking in this information, but you shouldn't take it as gospel. That's the main thing. They lack nuance fundamentally for that reason, right? It's, again, just images, sometimes ordered, sometimes not. I never order mine because it doesn't make any sense, because fundamentally they're supposed to be brackets of power and not a 1 through 10 list. But either way, the nature of tier lists just fundamentally lack nuance, but it is a easy way for people to understand, hey, this thing is better than the other thing, and so I'm gonna go off of that, right? Which leads me to the next point, agenda pushing. A lot of people like to use these tier lists, primarily the Pride 1 one, to push the agenda of specific characters without understanding the nuance of specific characters. And that is a problem because it results in more tribalism within these communities, right? I will never be for this agenda pushing unless it's hating on Jade, or Rappa. Those characters suck. But on a serious note, I say that because if you actually were to take the performance of these characters and look at it in the, like compare it across the game, right? To contextualize it throughout the game, those characters, from all the information I have, perform drastically worse than sites like Pride 1 will rate them, right? Massively overrated character. This Topaz has been completely power crept by Cypher in many cases, and then Rappa was never as good as Firefly. And same goes for a character like Fei Xiao. Fei Xiao is a character that for the longest time was overrated as hell, right? You should never be using these to justify your agenda pushing, especially within the consideration that they have these other issues as a part of the list, right? Possible incorrect info. It's just a bad site in general. Tier lists themselves not being perfect, and of course, bias in the list. People love to push agendas because it's fun, or it gives your message across, it gets, supports you, makes you feel better, blah, blah, blah. But this is completely illogical and should not be taken into consideration for really anything. In some cases, the game itself is going to be pushing an agenda, like, shilling for a specific character, right? Of course, that's going to be reflective of the game state. But even still, you shouldn't be pushing your narrative based on some random site's tier list. You should analytically and logically apply the same reasoning to everything within a list, okay? I can go further and philosophical on that, but the point is, people use tier lists to push agendas, and you shouldn't be doing that, right? It's that simple, especially in consideration of all the flaws of the tier list, right? One of my chatters mentioned the other day, E1S1. This is something that I think is actually fair to apply in Star Wars' case. Because of the way it's designed, they really want you to have the weapon. The thing you want to keep in mind is what weapon the character are using. Now, they do state that every character is using their optimal weapon, but in some cases, it's not necessarily their signature weapon. For example, Jing Liu's best weapon is actually going to be Maide's signature. Silver Wolf and these other debuffers' best weapon is actually going to be Cypher's light cone, because they made that light cone stupid busted, right? It's not something that's going to be the same across every tier list, because people might have different considerations. I am for considering the weapon, though. It's just you want to keep that in mind, that which weapon is being used. Like those examples of people using different possible weapons, right? This was a change they made recently, Pride 1 in particular, that, again, I think is a fair change to make. But at the same time, when you are making a tier list, you should apply the context that they are using a particular weapon in mind that just images doesn't fully do, right? Again, that's another, it goes back to those other problems that they lack nuance, that they're fundamentally just not perfect, and how their format is, because that's just what it is as a tier list. Maybe if we find a new format of, sharing this information, they'll be better than a tier list, right? That gets the same neurons firing for people as tier lists currently do. But again, there's things like that you want to consider, right? This one right here, you may not know as much as you think you do. This is sort of related to all the other ones, because you might not understand the full abilities of a character's kit, like the full I keep saying the word nuance, but that's pretty much what it is. Like how their kit works and how you can contextualize it across the entire game, like where it is going to fundamentally function better in other scenarios versus specific like scenarios where somebody else might work better. I think a good example is like Acheron. Like people don't understand why Acheron is aging so well as a unit. Well, it's because her abilities allow her to share her damage across the entire field, and it scales really well with different mechanics, right? There's a lot of things to consider and a lot of abilities in every character's kit, and you may not fully understand it. I see this all the time whenever people come into my chat. I'm sick of waiting. Okay, anyways, I don't know why I read that. Anyways, as I was saying, not everybody fully understands everything. I don't either. I don't claim to do. I know a lot, but that's because I'm constantly learning, doing research, and talking about the game and how things work, and try to contextualize it appropriately and analyze it to the best of my ability, right? And that's what hopefully you should do, and hopefully you can learn from this video, from the streams, from other people, and don't take everything as gospel. That was actually going to be one of the points. I forget which one, but you don't want to take these tier lists as gospel, right? Don't take anything you see on the internet. General advice. Don't take everything you see on the internet as gospel, especially these tier lists. Again, given all of these problems, right? And thank you for telling me it's live. I'll wrap this up pretty quickly. You may not know as much as you think, right? Again, I may not know as much as you think, but this is why you don't want to agenda push, because if you're going to be pushing an agenda and you can't actually back it up, well, you got a problem there, right? I try to back things up by fully explaining it, deep diving into it, how things work at a fundamental basis, like how the speed is going to be a ratio of the action value, just as a random example, or how like a certain character gives them a unique tech because they get energy restored on a whatever ability, whatever it may be. Like, I'm thinking of Saber in this example, but there's more to it than just saying, oh, X character is better or not, right? And that's what I try to do, what I try to provide in my streams as well. That context and that nuance on how things work, right? And you want to keep that in mind, that again, perhaps you're wrong, perhaps I'm wrong, perhaps some other creator's wrong, right? You just possibly don't know as much as you think. I see this all the time. People come in the chat, they say something and I can prove them wrong, or people will say something online and they don't actually know. This is related to disinformation that happens throughout the space in general. But like I could really go on that, but really it's as simple as this line of text right here. You just may not know as much as you think you do, right? That's the best way I could do it. And lastly, we kind of already mentioned it. It's going to get worse. A lot of these issues are going to get worse because of AI. You already saw with this one slop article being AI. God, I hate it. I hate it. But that's just sort of the nature of things. And it's your job to discern what's AI. This one's pretty clear. What's not. But this is why you should try to do the research yourself. Compare across different mediums, different factors, different content creators, all this other stuff. Gather the information, analyze it, and then apply that, with your gaming experience to whatever ability you want to. You just want to have fun and don't really care about the meta, or if you just want to talk about the game, whatever it may be. But that's it. I know chat wants me to hop in a game. Does anybody have anything else to say about this? Because I think that is absolutely everything in less time than I did in my previous video. So that's a good job. But yeah, that's really about it. Tier lists, they're not perfect. Stay in Anaxa. Okay. Yeah, so anyways, I like tier lists. I think they're a good way, if done right, to discuss particular topics, right? But they're not perfect, right? And so yeah, tell me what you think. Oh my god, there's a hair. Tell me what you think about this down below. What are your thoughts on tier lists? What are your thoughts on this video? Don't forget to like, subscribe to me on Twitch. And yeah, see you next one. Bye.